Okay, well, yes, thank you all for coming back this afternoon or joining us this afternoon here at the museum. So this is actually, I think, a really fascinating sort of transition from the topics that were covered this morning, which obviously reflect just the incredible scholarship and work that happens within museums all the time, whether it's this archival work or studio art, et cetera. So this sort of portion, my portion of the summer work and Riley's that will follow mine, has more to do with almost the business models of museums or how museums are thinking about themselves kind of in the world of the economy, commerce, leisure time, et cetera. So I'll speak today specifically about this idea about online classes, and the way that we've been thinking about this is within the realm of social enterprise. So what are things that are both beneficial to institutions from a revenue perspective and also have these sort of socially inclined outcomes and influences on the world? So just a little bit about myself. So my name is Marie Edland. I am here this summer in Denver from Philadelphia. And I work at the Barnes Foundation, which I'll spend some more time thinking about and talking about. But specifically at the Barnes, I am a research analyst in our strategy and kind of impact department. So that often means thinking about our highest level institutional data collection efforts, thinking about the evaluation of programs, and thinking about strategic initiatives. But I think at the highest level, the work, and this is the work that everyone is doing, in their own way in museums, but it really is amplifying the work that we've all been talking about. What is this story? What is it that we want people to know about all of our institutions that might be happening behind closed doors? So thinking about that from kind of a reporting and analysis perspective. So for anyone who's not as, so firstly, what have I been thinking about this summer as a social enterprise fellow? So again, this is sort of taking the lens of diversified earned revenue sources or just thinking about earned revenue in general. So what are some things that museums can learn from peer institutions? For example, in this case, obviously the Barnes and here at the Still. My project specifically focuses on a technological development during COVID and sort of what does that mean 5 years later in terms of museum education. So we'll think about that together. And then to sort of dive into that question specifically, does online education in whatever form feel like kind of an interesting project for a museum like this? So very briefly, I'll just describe the project of the Barnes Foundation for anyone who's unfamiliar. So this is an art museum in Center City, Philadelphia. Its current kind of architectural situation actually kind of mirrors the Clyfford Still in some ways. It opened in 2012 and has this very sort of modern building. But on the inside is this time capsule, in a sense, of a personal collection of Albert Barnes's. He was amassing his collection primarily in the 1910s, 20s, and 30s. As you'll see, he sort of considered some of the pillars of the collection to be his Cézanne collection, his Renoir collection, his Matisse collection, and his Picasso collection, but everything is arranged in these really kind of eccentric, eclectic ways. And the idea is, you'll also notice that there are no didactics, and so the sort of educational project has always been, since the foundation's founding in 1922, to really invite people in to have their own kind of personal experience with works, to take the Barnesian idea, along the lines of line, light, color, and form. So education has been happening kind of in these galleries for 100 years, and it was always in person. Just this slide just gives you a sense of what the sort of contemporary array of classes are. There are hyper-specific things. There are more broad kind of introductory courses that track pieces of the collection and elements of the collection. But so this has kind of been its educational legacy in a way. And then I'll show you this graph that, again, feels not very artful, but I'll sort of connect it back to why this is important for the collection. So these classes had been happening and kind of slowly building within the foundation's work, the museum's work. In 2019, we were working with almost 1,400 students, which is already quite a few. But then we all remember what happened in 2020. There was this absolute sort of like pivot shift of what all institutions were doing. And there was this real kind of acceleration at that point in 2020 to think about delivering these art historical classes and kind of art criticism classes online. So as you can see, that like more than doubled our revenue in that period. So that goes from that 2019 to 2020 bar. And it also had a really, really amazing kind of transformational quality to the students that we were able to work with as an institution, so instructors from the museum. You'll also see there's this sort of ebb and flow of revenue and students reached, but there's also this really fascinating flip, obviously, in the revenue of this entire program, so of both in-person classes and online classes. The flip really came from students taking online classes with us. So that is that bar at the very top, talking about the percent of annual revenue for this program that came from online students. So this was interesting, right? There were almost 4,000 students taking these classes. They were on teams at the time, and the institution was thinking about how is it that we're kind of intentionally transforming that gallery experience and that in-person experience into a virtual time or class convening, et cetera. And in 2021 and 22, the Barnes, received a number of grants and kind of individual contributions to build out an online learning platform that's really intended and sort of designed with the intention of studying visual work, so artwork at distance. And that is now, so this goes up to 2024, and that's now what our classes are held on. They're held on this learning platform that we're calling the Visual Experience Platform at the moment. So I thought it could be fun to kind of give you an example of what the class experience is like using this online platform. So I am going to attempt to open this link that will take us somewhere, and then the next, I'll go back here, and if you'd like, no pressure, but if you want to scan this QR code, you can kind of like enter into the same learning environment that I'll be in over here on the other side. Go back. Oh, sorry. I'm doing this at distance and sideways too. The least helpful. There we go. All right. So this is a very like pared back version of what this online environment looks like in a class. Usually there's like a video stream and chat, etc. But what's really fun about this is that the technology is designed for, as everyone can see, they're sort of moving on their own time. And I, as the instructor, can also direct our vision to pieces and elements of these compositions, in this case, a Clyfford Still work. I've also just loaded in some fun archival material to kind of browse together as well. So thinking about online learning and kind of the project of what does this look like at one museum as it's maybe being transformed to another. So what have I done over the course of this 4 weeks? we've kind of been talking about it in our little social enterprise world as almost like an ethnography of the museum, where you really have to take time to speak with everyone and kind of visit every part and corner of the museum to understand what it is that we're trying to do. Every museum has like a very distinct kind of personality and I think approach to education in particular. So I've had the pleasure of speaking with so many people here at the institution, all of whom have really given their like candid and thoughtful responses to me about what it is that feels essential to the Stills educational program. And here are some of those kind of summary findings that I think will scaffold any kind of educational program that might be born of this sort of collaboration or this time of reflection. I hope that all of these pieces of content feel like authentic and are sort of a reflection of what everyone has shared with me during this time. But the museum, I think, has this strong commitment to a shared authority with whoever it is that is interpreting Still's work. It has this idea of accessibility and kind of audience-centered growth, if we want to think about it in that way. I've also found it really inspiring. I think this came up a lot this morning, but this idea around seeing Still's work as kind of a catalyst for personal reflection and personal growth without this kind of one singular narrative, clearly, as everyone shared this morning. And with Nicole's work, and I think Kyung-Ah's work that will be showcased later this afternoon, there's this kind of commitment to innovation and diversification and experimentation in education. The Still is also at an interesting time thinking about earned revenue because of its 15th anniversary that's upcoming next year. There's also this project around brand building and just sort of getting this message out into the world. That is, again, all of the scholarship that we've been talking about, some of the core stories. And then classes, I think, also have this opportunity with something like membership and fundraising to just sort of bring some life back into that. So what have I come up with over the course of this month? The idea that someone sort of came up with, I think, early on was a series of classes. This is a proposal, of course, just something to think about. But a series of classes offered by the Still in this distance learning format, so welcoming students, hopefully all over the country and maybe the world, to answer this question or begin to understand this question of who was Clyfford Still. So these are, again, just a sketch of what this could look like. Clearly, I think all of the three fellows this morning could teach their own class, and it would be super compelling and fascinating, and that might be something like an extension of this final idea here of rediscovering Still and scholarship today. So I think a lot of the behind-the-scenes work for this project has been understanding what the budget for something like this would look like, understanding what a pricing model should be, and thinking about having the confines or the sort of contours of an educational program that could really sustain itself and then have some revenue left over to reinvest into the program. So with the help of Sonia, I also just had her sort of mock up what this might look like. So this is something using Still's branding and thinking about what this could look like in real life. So these would be the proposals, month-long classes that someone would sign up for and sort of engage with whoever that scholar or person is from inside the museum over the course of a month, right? It's a very fun idea. And yeah, so we can watch that little animation however many times we want. But yeah, so I also wanted to bring in this framework around evaluation of this kind of social enterprise program. So this is kind of a rudimentary or like, sort of simplistic rubric, but this takes as an example an evaluation tool that we've been using at the Barnes, where we're always in thinking about something that is priced at a certain point and you're thinking about the budget, that reflection around revenue and sort of attractiveness to audiences is always really important. But the fact that it's like rooted in our educational department means that there are all of these other elements that are also really important and might determine the success of a class in a slightly different way than simply its attendance and its revenue. So in thinking about this with sort of our social enterprise group, this will look very different for the Still or any other museum that might have this sort of educational program that is also revenue generating. But just an example to think through. So these are almost personal reflections coming out of the month. I think, as everyone has shared, this has been a really transformational experience for, I think, our entire cohort. It's been really fun and just really rewarding to kind of be given that access to understand and really study and describe what everyone is doing here at the museum. So I think what's been so valuable about this feeling of parachuting out from one museum and into another is that we're all just thinking about the realm of art museums. Everyone is coming at their scholarship and their programmatic priorities in different ways, but there are so many ways to learn from each other, and every museum is doing incredible trial and error, and we might as well create these opportunities to really share those successes and failures. So I think that has just been so valuable to me. This will feel obvious to everyone in the room, but this idea of sort of developing an educational program within a museum that feels sort of authentic to the core of that museum is always kind of creating this invitation for individuals to have personal responses with our collection. So how do we think very broadly about that, but also very narrowly about that, and invite people in these different ways, using the expertise that we know is in our walls, right? And then this is a similar idea, but I've just found it so fascinating to think critically about all of these museum practices when we're thinking about what does success look like in one institution versus another. How are we telling these stories about institutional impact? And what do we all see as kind of our growth or experimentation opportunities? So those are sort of my closing conclusions, and hopefully we have a few minutes for Q&A.